right, welcome back to Patient Win Insider. I'm Nick Moen, and today I'm joined by Dr. Andrew Hall from the Studio for Exceptional Dentistry in Colorado Springs. Dr. Hall is a cosmetic and digital dentistry pioneer who's been pushing boundaries for nearly 2 decades. And so today we're going to dig into how digital workflows are transforming patient experience, reducing stress, and reshaping the modern dental practice. Thanks for coming on, Dr. Hall.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I just want to get the background established here because you have a really unique story that, your start was in the Army service in dentistry, right? So, and then all of a sudden you built a cosmetic practice out of that. How did that kind of shape your philosophy as a clinician?
Well, yeah. I kind of always knew that I wanted to end up in cosmetics. I have veneers on my teeth and I've had them since I was in dental school. So it was kind of a shaping moment for me of impact, but how do you get there, right? And what's all involved with that. But yeah, I started out, I graduated from the University of Florida back in 2001. And then I owed the Army some time because they had paid for some of my undergraduate studies. But I was fortunate. I was very fortunate. It was a good experience. It was a great experience and a challenging experience. But those are what tend to be what shape us, right? So I came out and then I was able to actually do a residency for 1 year. So that was leaps and bounds. Like I wish that our younger dental students had that ability to just, have an additional year of just learning stuff, having mentors that are direct to those specialties, allowing them to kind of navigate what they really kind of enjoy doing, and do they want to specialize? I mean, it was an unbelievable year as far as just learning, after the core foundational stuff that was laid in dental school. And so yeah, so it was, I got that advantage, and then was a staff dentist for 3 years after that. Spent a little time deployed just because of the timeline of what was going on in the world. So I learned a lot, but it just wasn't, the career path that I thought it might be. And so I just decided to then separate, come out to Colorado, and opened up a practice a couple of years later.
And that was 2008 when you opened up the practice, right?
Yeah, so I moved here a couple of years prior to that, and as an associate, because again, I was born and raised in Florida, so I didn't really have any roots in Colorado, and it was kind of just a new adventure to try to figure out that was where we wanted to lay roots and where we're going to stay. Especially once you start a practice, as everybody knows, once you start a practice, you're embedded, for a while at least. And so I just kind of figured out the lay of the land as far as what Colorado looked like, and specifically to Colorado Springs. And then I had a couple offers to either buy in as partners or that sort of stuff. And then I said, I don't know, I had a great mentor when I was an associate. He's a fantastic clinician. He's still practicing to this day, but I didn't, if I was going to invest in something, I kind of wanted to invest in my dream and my goal and in that sort of thing. So it just kind of led me to doing what is kind of uncommon now, at least from what I understand, is, a scratch startup with very little experience. A lot of these young docs will work 4 or 5 years, multiple associateships or what have you, and then they might venture out and do that. But I don't think that's probably the trend right now. But yeah, so we started a practice from scratch back in 2008.
So, and I've had a couple guests on that I've heard that it can be kind of like a dark, lonely time. Starting from scratch, no patience, you're starting, like, how did you get through that? When was the turning point? How many years did it take to hit kind of a point where you're like, all right, I'm starting to see the light?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's with anything, right? You have to go in with the right strategy and expectation, and figure out. So I knew I wasn't probably going to be able to just be at my practice solo, hoping that somebody would walk in and need dental work. So I had augmented it with, like, I was working with a large group practice who I was just like, okay, I'll just go work 1 day a week there, just as a stable paycheck to make sure things. And then as things start to slowly ramp up in the practice, but it really didn't take as long. Again, it's 2008. It wasn't the best time to start any business.
Right.
Just from a retrospective standpoint. I mean, there's been hard times since, obviously, too, but it probably took, a year and a half where I was like, okay, this is going to be just fine. Like, I can do this. And I've been very, very, very fortunate. It's not like I've ever worked 6 days a week in the practice. Because I knew I couldn't sustain that. And it's just, so it's always been we've always tried, our goal was always to be very patient centered, make the patients not feel like they're being run through a mill, which at that point where there was a lot of that still kind of going on because the private practice model was still, I think, really prevalent. And to have that now today, I think is actually a differentiating factor for some things, just because of the fact that we've gone to such a, and I don't want to offend anybody, we've gone to such a corporate model where sometimes patients feel that as well in a trickle down effect.
Yeah. Well, so let's go back to kind of where the artistry comes in. I mean, you're starting a practice from scratch,
Mhm.
and somehow you had kind of there was something tickling you about technology and like the artistry of dentistry and like
Yeah.
what gets you excited there. And so you got was it a CEREC mill you got first, like kind of early on, right off the bat?
Yeah. So again, there's pivotal kind of, as you kind of look back and you're like, okay, you look at the timeline of how I got to where I am. There's kind of these pivotal moments of whether you met somebody, got introduced to something as far as technology, something that triggered your interest. And so I was very fortunate because the associateship that I walked into, they had CEREC technology on board. And they were like, if you can learn this, feel free to use it. And it'll also be an advantage to you because we won't charge you a lab bill or whatever. How most
Yeah.
associates contracts are. Right. So I'm like, okay, great. That's cool. I'll learn it. And I was fortunate enough to then kind of meet some people who became pillars in this community very early on in it. And so I've been able to kind of swim in those circles, spend time mentoring, spend time lecture. And then it all just kind of crescendos into becoming a trainer, becoming a mentor, becoming a faculty member at, for CEREC doctors and what's now CDocs, because they don't want to just be associated with CEREC. And I've seen all of that come to maturation, but it was that exposure at that time of like, learn this. So to answer your question is, I knew I wanted technology in the practice. Like it was a no brainer because it was what I had adapted to doing. And it was probably the hardest 6 months of my life because I didn't buy it when I built out the practice.
Yeah.
And 6 months in, I said, I can't do this anymore. I got to go back to when I was. And even then, it was like, comparatively to what we have today as far as technology, I mean, that was such a nuisance, then, but I was in my hands, it was still more comfortable than a traditional type of approach.
Yeah. So
So,
how did it affect your day to day? Because you said after 6 months, that's when you got your
mhm.
first mill. Then
Yeah, so that was there. That would have been like probably Blue Cam, I think
okay,
is what would have been at that point. Yeah, it was Blue Cam because what happened was we bought Blue Cam, and then what traditionally happens as soon as you invest in something else, the next version comes out like the next like 3 months later, right? It's just Newton's law. And so I think that had happened with us, but they took care of us as far as a financial standpoint there. And then and then that became the focus of the practice where the patient, I think I might have said this to you when we were talking before, is like my patients, that's what they expect. Like if like they know if they come to see me that, that's their typical experience. And so it's still kind of eye opening to me when patients come new to the practice or come to me like say they come in with an emergency and they're like, I lost my crown or what have you. I'm like, all right, well, just can you give me an hour and a half and you'll be done. And they're like, oh, so I'll have to leave with my temporary. And I'll be like, no, we'll be done.
yeah,
Like we'll be done with the procedure. You'll go on about your business, and go do whatever it is. And so to them, it's kind of still kind of like, but but to my core, patients, it's just become the standard, and it's great. I think it helped us initially early on to again be a differentiator in kind of a startup.
I mean, referrals must have been easy when people are shocked at the service they're getting, right?
Yeah, and it was funny because we would even get, I remember specifically, not so much anymore, just because we don't have as much time and we're trying to take care of the patients that we know a lot of. But it's we would get referrals for patients from other practices who, say at the end of the year needed a crown, but they couldn't wait 2 weeks to get the crown seated. Silly little things like that, right? And it's like, oh, well, to go over here, they can do it in a single visit. And again, it's like, it's crazy. So again, after 2 decades of doing it, it's just like, it's what we do day to day. And my team, as far as their workflows, between my patients' expectations, and obviously then how I'm practicing. And the interesting thing is that I think one of my good friends once said this: digital dentistry, however you want to think about it. Because early days it was just CEREC; they were kind of the pioneer. Right now, there's a great, don't get me wrong, there's a ton of great scanners out there, and it's always good when there's competition to push for advancements. But it's kind of a gateway. kind of a gateway drug to more technology and actually also learning more clinical dentistry, because then I got a CBCT very early on before that was even a standard in endo practices,
Yeah.
but it was like, and it was like, but then it was like, okay, if I have this, it's going to help me place implants. It's going to help me be more efficient at this process. It's going to help me do these things. And so it's just kind of like this full circle, like, you know, again, just the workflow or maturation that we see. And I've seen it not just for myself. I've seen all my colleagues are, or they all, many of my colleagues that are, entered at the same timeline. We've been all kind of on that same trajectory.
Yeah. What advice would you give to people battling with maybe like the learning curve of, the software, digital tools, or
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
what would you say?
Well, many years ago, I would say there's like, I mean, again, because I was fortunate enough to be one of those people who was instructing it, and so it was a job for me.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many people in this state of Colorado that I helped train initially, and it was very cumbersome. But it's a very interesting that you bring this up right now because now we're seeing where with the introduction of cloud-based stuff, AI, and all the integration that we're seeing in that in every walk of life, right? Not just, but now we're seeing it in dentistry. So now we're seeing Dentsply Sirona specifically speaking to them, taking the CEREC software to the cloud essentially with an AI assistant, which you're starting to see on everything, right? You pull up, Adobe and you got an AI assistant, you pull up whatever, right? And so it's just becoming kind of this embedded expectation within a software, but now that's what's running the CEREC software. So the idea is that this is now like the learning curve is far less because we have all of this data over time of the best processes, the best workflows, all that sort of stuff. So it went from a 2-day course, of us sitting with new owners about how to scan, and because all the stuff was much more cumbersome and it was more you had to be specific about certain procedures, and then we were bonding everything because it was all glass ceramic, and it was a whole different, but to now, I just got it last week where they're like, okay, and it's a known fact, so we can talk about it, but they're in the next few months we'll be launching this. It's kind of in the tail end of the clinical trials. That's my answer to the question is if the barriers have been significantly
Yeah.
reduced, in my opinion, just based on what I've seen from before.
Well, what about the cost though? I mean, is it worth it? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
the investment? Yeah.
If you're committed to it, absolutely.
Yeah.
If it's going to become a coat rack, then no.
Right.
And then I've
Right.
seen, so it comes down to, are you willing to accept the change in your workflow? Are you willing to, adapt? Because let's be honest, in 10, 20, 30 years, and I asked this the other day of a group, will digital dentistry be the standard? That's a legitimate question I think we have to ask ourselves, especially with the generations that's coming up. They'll be like, I don't want to do it that way. I'm used to doing everything digital on an iPad. That's the way that's the way I live. And so the consumer's expectation, which if you want to survive as a business, you have to kind of pay attention to that. I think, again, that's probably what differentiated us earlier because I knew that people that was where we were going. At least I thought that, and not to think that we would get to where we are now. But yeah, I think it's worth it. It pays for itself. I mean, I know you, and I've done all the sales talks. I've been the guy who's been up on stages, big stages in front of groups. I've gone all over the world, literally all over the world, talking about whether it's the specific technology or the materials that we're using or training people on new materials. It does pay for itself as long as you learn to do it. And what we're seeing now is huge increase in time efficiency with it. I mean, what used to be like, people would say, oh, it's a 3-hour appointment, and it's like, that's ridiculous to block off that much chair time because I could be doing X, Y, and Z during that. Well, now though, if you can get this done in an hour, 90 minutes, because some of the variables that were taking so long before, those fixed times, like mill times. I mean, when they introduced super fast milling of zirconia, I could mill a block in 4 minutes. I would have never thought that, 20 years ago.
Right.
We were lucky. We were happy if it was under 15,
Right. Yeah.
and so it was like, it's been like I kind of see both sides of it because I do, complete transparency. I do speak and talk for them. So I understand their side of it, like from the the development they understand that that's what clinicians want. And so if you can get this down to that time frame, there's no way that it's more efficient for you to prep, temporize, return the patient. Just, I mean, if you, and I hate to say this, just think the overhead that it costs you to set up
Yeah.
your operatory for your second appointment, that is of zero value.
Yeah. Well, what about like quality of life for you, for the team? I mean, from like an operations perspective, all right, so you're cutting an appointment down or cutting it in half, squeezing in an extra patient because you can. The tools are there. I mean, how do you balance then potentially the stress of there being more efficiency in production?
As far as, well, the nice thing is that what we say is that you get to choose what you do with that additional time, right? You get to choose if you want to squeeze in that extra patient. You get to decide if you want to go home early, right? You get to do those sort of things. But I would ask it this way. I would say, when you're comparing the two things, right? If we're going to sit and just say, hey, let's have a conversation about, let's compare traditional, what I would sometimes refer to as an analog, not in a derogatory way, but it just gives a direct correlation to digital, right? Because that's what people know. There's pain points with that, right? I mean, how many times are you like worried about the case being delivered on time, right? Or the impression isn't what you thought it was, and you got to bring the patient back in. There's the goop. People don't love having impressions taken. There's a set of challenges with that. The difference being with the digital is that there is that instant feedback. Like if the prep's not right, okay, patient's still sitting there. There's no temporary on the tooth. I can just clean up what I need to clean up and go finish what I need to finish. And the labs aren't afforded that. Let's be honest. The dentist will say, just do as good as you could. It's the best I could get. Whether that's a difficult clinical situation, difficult patient. Again, add up the variables. So for me, it reduces the stress. It's just because mostly it gives me a very predictable, and that's the end result, right? Like if I know that I'm going to get a nice fitting restoration, I know that what workflow is going to work for me to get to that point, and I've done it. I can't even tell you how many thousands of times. That's where it reduces the stress for us as far as a team. We're not worried about, is the case here, did Sally lose her temporary? Those sorts of things don't ever real issues.
Yeah. Well, and I guess being in education, aside from, operations, especially, I mean, most of the people coming, I guess, are interested in digital dentistry, but are still not stuck on analog, but used to analog, grew up on analog. So what's missing? Like, what's the gap there? And how are you bridging the gap between analog and digital when people are new to it, I guess?
Yeah, that's a great question, because if we knew that, we'd have everybody, we'd probably we'd flip the scales the other way, right? Where it wouldn't be that the majority would be digital, versus the majority being traditional. Probably the biggest, I mean, let's go back to the way we're trained. That's probably the biggest gap that we would have to, that would have to take. And the challenges, and I can speak to this, not in a derogatory way, but most of our dental school faculty are not young and out there pursuing digital dentistry, right? They're doing what they do really well, which is train young dentists, right? But they're training them in a way that, so there are programs that are more diverse and have brought digital dentistry to that educational platform. But honestly, I think that would be the roots that would have to be where that would become the predominant way that they're being taught, not the one-off elective that they might get to do as a senior.
Right.
And so it would have to start there. And then it has to be, then the other biggest barrier is cost, like you alluded to before. It has to make sense for the practitioner. But I think you'll see that there's going to be a different landscape in that potentially here soon. And I think other technologies like 3D printing, other things are kind of pushing, all the boundaries here as far as, okay, how do we align all of this in a portfolio that makes sense for the true digital dentist?
And then sure. And so what does that look like for, let's say it's a post-grad program, right? What sort of post-grad training, if you were to design a program, and I know you're already teaching and working, like what would the ideal program look like for digital dentistry?
Well, for digital dentistry, it would be that workflow on every patient, because honestly, we take and again, full disclosure, I have several different scanners in the office, but my hygienist scan. So it's just a commitment to like that becoming, and digital dentistry is more than just fabricating crowns. Digital dentistry is digital smile design. I mean, that's part of digital dentistry, so it's So you would have to have a program that understands that digital dentistry is again a very broad topic. And then these would be all these subsets underneath that of how does it affect my workflow, right?
Yeah.
And that's what it would have to boil down to. Okay, so if I'm going to focus on implantology, how am I going to use technologies to advance that or to make it more predictable? Because that's what clinicians want. They want predictability because what we do is hard enough that, we deal with enough variables. It's like, I need something to be predictable for me. So if I can plan the case better, if I can, plan from a restorative aspect, those sorts of things, but that all still falls under that digital dentistry type of approach. So it would be a multifaceted thing. It wouldn't just be, well, we're just milling crowns or we're just, using whatever mill, is out there. It would be more of a like a mindset
Okay.
as far as how we're going to approach, all aspects of dentistry. Because I mean, let's be honest, it's probably just there's going to be more digital stuff introduced, right? Again, you go back to AI, you go back to these companies like Pearl and Overjet. It's digital is not, we're not seeing more new analog ways being devised,
Yeah, right.
right?
No, and
So
everything's now hosted and like collaborating in the cloud. Like you have all these tools
yeah.
in a toolbox. So where do you see? Because you already mentioned like with Dentsply, like Dentsply is already using the cloud. Like where do you see that technology going? Because I feel like being able to, especially with AI, combining all these tools for a certain case, like what do you see the potential there looking like?
Yeah, so you see, and that's a great, you kind of see that true digital patient, right? So you would see that platform of everything being stored in the cloud and being like, it'd be kind of like the Tom Cruise thing where he's got that big screen in front of him, and he's like flipping through things, I
Yeah.
forget if it's a Mission Impossible thing or what have you, you know, but that's kind of where it would go. And the nice thing would be is that it would be, you could say, hey, I need to send this to this specialist to get a, opinion, and it'd just be, hey, can you look at this? And it'd be that easy, right? Of just, hey, collaborative effect of us kind of,
Yeah.
all sitting in and being able to see all these pieces of data. Because let's be honest, I send a patient to an endodontist, let's say, for this tooth, but we're like, are we missing the big picture here? Should we be talking about something different and how this is going to affect the overall treatment plan and not just like, this. So that's what I would kind of see that whole thing allowing us to do. It's just a matter, the biggest challenge with it is the organization of it, and how that looks as far as there a certain template that everything just gets auto-populated into. Because what we don't want to create is more work of like, okay, I got to go upload all these photos to this part, right? And then I've got to take up my CBCT from over here and pull it in. And then and then how is that organized and laid out? And it's funny you ask that because there's a group working on that right now that I'm well aware of to try to figure those things out, because that's what I think, taking things from a local directory, if you will, of in the office, it'll
Yeah.
allow that to actually someday happen. And that would be great. And the patient will ultimately benefit from that.
Right.
That's what this is all about.
Yeah, I mean, and do you see it being that way where all of a sudden experts in this, something that somebody else's, complete specialty on, they're the ones getting referenced and poked through the cloud in order to, weigh in on a certain case? I'm just thinking of technology
Yeah,
now, and like sometimes it seems like everyone's more disconnected than they are connected, but
true. Yeah, because of the fact that we're just tied to a screen. Yeah,
yeah,
and the interesting thing is that you're going to see. I think what you'll also see is you'll see a business opportunity. To be honest with you, of how do you get those records to those specialists that you think you want to collaborate with,
sure. Yeah.
right? Because they may not be in your local network, they may not be in your community. You're going to see it takes that and changes it as far as of, well, I'm working with the oral surgeon down the street because that's who I know and who they bring us something at Christmas for my team.
Yeah.
To now, can I get a bunch of other opinions of guys and gals, whatever, that are really progressive, thinking outside the box, those sorts of things. So and then how do you get that to that? Is that a service that you're subscribing to? Is that you're going to see a lot of this sort of offshoots of advancing and, the advance of the technology opening up some business models, I think. And I would tell you, I've seen some of that already. So that's why I say that.
So there's already work from home remote dentistry happening? Isn't that like the
Yeah,
future? Like,
there is. And think about it from certain platforms like orthodontics,
okay, sure, sure,
where it comes down to maybe more so treatment planning than it does execution,
sure.
right? So, but it's a matter of, well, do you have all the tools to treatment plan it, or is there somebody better suited? And that sort of thing. But being able to share everything seamlessly and those sorts of things. But yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, like I'm not a huge DS core person. I mean, the Dentsply Sirona core, their cloud-based thing, just because I haven't adapted to it. I'm going to be forced to because of some of the tools and workflows that I have. But I will say it was really nice the other day to just be able to go home onto my computer, pull up a file and send it to the lab at home. I mean, before I'd have to be on site. And you may say, well, that's not a big deal. No, there are times where that is a big deal. I mean, how many times every dentist has been on vacation and gotten a call about like, well, where's this, that, or the other? You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? And it's like, well, if I can log in and find you know, on my phone and
yeah,
find the files and say, hey, send this to my favorite lab, whatever, because they need it, in order to get the case back in time. That's a luxury we didn't always have,
yeah,
and it does shape, things. And now, like I just said, designing, like if I want to design a big case later, maybe I'm designing it in the cloud, not sitting on my actual local CEREC machine or at a workstation, if you will, from that sort of thing. So that's the biggest thing because it all comes back to me as far as like workflow, like how does
yeah.
it affect that? And then how does it affect the patient experience and expectation?
Yeah. Well, and quality of life. I mean, you want excellent,
Mhm.
excellent results and service, and sounds like you're providing that. Is that, I mean, having balance and keeping patients happy, and then also it seems like your work-life balance is working, especially now with technology being implemented. Where does your passion lie in dentistry now? Like, what's getting you into the practice in the morning?
Well, it's funny. Over the last few years, the practice, I'm still a general dentist and I still do a lot of general dentistry. But I would say ever since COVID, actually, we're at 5 years now, we have had a heavy, heavy, heavy influence in cosmetic dentistry. And so it's taken off. I mean, you've seen it take off kind of all around. You've seen it's a lot of noise, if you will, on social media about it. I think that's a fair way of saying it. It's become a very popular item, and so we've been fortunate enough that to move in that direction and be able to work with a lot of great people and hopefully deliver to them what is can be life changing. So that's like I said, and that's where I kind of started. I knew that's where I wanted to be, and it's always been a component of the practice, but it's never been as large of a component of the practice as it has now. But again, that's its focus, it's technology. I think we were talking about, like allowing virtual consultations, like
Yeah.
changing the way that, we see dentistry, right? It's not that traditional. And again, I will use a traditional model of like, well, you have to come and see me and pay for my consultation fee. And then I'm just going to hand you a piece of paper that tells you how much it's going to be, and I'm not going to build value, or the people who are good know how to build value in that short time period that they're interacting with them. But it's using tools to, whether it be smile simulation, whether it be digital smile designs, whether it be AI smiles that are thrown into these spaces, as far as all you take a big picture, now they have the videos where you just take a picture, it puts a smile in there and then it makes them turn and laugh. I'm like, that's crazy good, So there's all those touch points, for the way that we interact with the technology or the digital aspect of it. But that's really where, we've seen an uptick and then there becomes a demand and and it was intentional. Don't get me wrong. It wasn't like we just fell into it, but that's where I spend a lot of time. But again, like I said, I kind of grew up on traditional digital dentistry and that sort of stuff and just kind of laid the groundwork, I guess, for where we are now.
Yeah. Well, congrats on, decades in the field and shaping what you're shaping and getting us out of the analog stage, I
Yeah.
remember. Yeah, I'm really I'm glad that I was able to have you on the podcast, Dr. Hall.
Yeah, no, thank you, Nick. I'm always happy to talk about digital dentistry. Like I said, I'm a big proponent. Obviously, I'm a little biased. I think it benefits the practitioner. I think it benefits the patient, and ultimately the entire practice. As long as there's a buy-in that they understand that going into it, and that'll only become easier and easier and easier as we see like the things you've talked about and mentioned, you know, AI, cloud-based, what everybody's talking about, from and any sort of industry, whether it's health, music, whatever. It's all the same touch points.
So where do people
Yeah.
find you?
Yeah, I mean, so on Instagram is probably the best place to find me or where I'm most active. Unfortunately, I have a team who takes care of a lot of that stuff now just because it's gotten out of hand. But at Dr. underscore Andrew Hall, that's my handle there. That's where we try to promote a lot of our stuff, or on all those. And then just, that's probably the best place to find us there. But yeah, it's been great, Nick. I really appreciate the time.
Okay, sounds good. Have a good day. Thanks, Dr. Hall.
Thank you, Nick.